The Anxiety and OCD podcast by Robert James Coaching. Hello and welcome to the Anxiety and OCD podcast, where we explore how to have a more positive relationship with anxiety disorders, taking back control so that you can start living the life you choose and not the one chosen by your fears. Hello and welcome to the podcast, everyone. Today I'm interviewing Liam, who tells us all about his story of OCD, some of the things that he found most difficult with having OCD, his experiences with therapy and working with therapists, and also looking at some of the ways that he's learnt to manage living with OCD. Liam's a really articulate guy, and he's very good at explaining the difficulties that we all face when dealing with OCD. I hope you find it helpful and enjoyable. If you'd like to give me some feedback, please go ahead. Also, if you want to check out my Instagram page, you can. It's Robert James Coaching UK. And if you'd like to join the Robert James Coaching Anxiety and OCD support group on Facebook, you are more than welcome to. Okay, guys, I hope you enjoy it. Many thanks. Okay, so today I'm here with Liam, who's had OCD for 10 years now, didn't you say?
Yep.
Okay, so can you tell us a bit more about yourself, please, Liam, like where you're from and kind of what you do and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I'm a UX designer in Amsterdam, and I've lived here about 3 years. I'm originally from Northern Ireland, and yeah, I guess my background is like a creative tech type. And I love like traveling, usual kind of person, traveling, seeing friends, cinema, pubs, drinks, parties, very average.
The standard thing.
Yeah, the standard stuff. Yeah.
Cool. So when did you first start struggling with OCD?
Well, I think I was struggling with OCD for a lot longer than I was officially diagnosed. I think I had a tendency growing up to overthink. I mean, how do you know what's a baseline average? Because everyone's in their own head. But I think I spent more time thinking and worrying as a child and a teenager than was probably normal. And I think I was sort of predisposed to have it. And I can look back now at 34 and see what where OCD type behaviors and thoughts when I was younger. Officially, I got it when I was, I'd say 24, 5. And then it's sort of been ever since. It's been, persistent. Yeah.
Okay. And what have you done up until this point to try and deal with it, to try and like manage it?
Do I heard a really great quote years ago, and it was about, I think it was somebody talking about their depression or another affliction or disease or sickness that they had. And they said along the lines of, it's better to be a student of your affliction than a sufferer. And I thought, wow, that's really that's really powerful when you think of it like that, because
absolutely. Yeah.
A choice to understand and learn what you're going through and not sort of sit at its mercy and go, oh, woe is me. So that, honestly, that sounds really simplistic, but that little expression it stuck with me ever since, and I've always tried to learn more and more about my OCD, because I mean, I can be frank with you, like last year it was coming up in new ways, new obsessions and new
themes. And yeah, it does that all the time. It kind of morphs into new things, and you think you're kind of dealing with it, and suddenly a new one comes up, and it's like, geez, this is a hard one to deal with.
exactly. And you're unprepared because you think, oh, that's not going to bother me. And then before you know it, it does. And then you're in a spiral. But
Mm.
what I've learned, like, to keep me going is just kind of confronting it and not being afraid of it, not letting it kind of take charge, and um, talking about it is one of the biggest things that
Yeah,
helps. For sure.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I really think you're right. I think that's an amazing like message that you learned there, and
Mm.
it's about kind of maybe being curious, no, about the OCD, like what is it actually,
Yeah,
like kind of and looking into ways, like being open to kind of to find new ways to deal with it, and that's a really healthy way of approaching it, I think.
absolutely, absolutely. And so much I've done better is by learning about it and reading about it and meeting other people and just being, as you say, curious, just kind of getting to know it a bit better, because it's such an intimate illness, I guess, if you want to call it. I sometimes struggle with the lexicon because, is it an illness? I don't know. It's chronic. It's
Yeah.
not, it doesn't stop me. I'm not, it's like strange. I don't know. But talking about it, learning definitely helps.
Yeah, I think in a way OCD is amazing in a way because it makes you become a better person. So to kind of overcome OCD, you have to become a better person. You have to educate yourself in how to learn to deal with anxiety and how to kind of I don't know how to be more open to all of your emotions, not just the positive ones. And I think that's actually a really healthy thing. And we always tend to focus on the negatives of OCD because there are a lot of negatives, obviously, and that's the kind of thing that we're all stuck on most of the time. But like sometimes there is something that's trying to teach you that I think is helpful, and I try to kind of remind myself of that sometimes.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, no, that's very true. Very
Yeah.
true.
So when did you kind of first like speak to somebody or like family about it, or like did you see a therapist first, or what did you
Sure.
do?
Yeah, um, well, context, I was living in Dublin in 2010,
Mm.
and my mum passed away that year, and that
Oh
was
no.
big, obviously, losing a parent, and especially a parent you're close to.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. That's
Ah, yeah,
doubly tough. Yeah.
yeah. It was a hard year. There was a lot of things that gone wrong that year. Was doing a master's degree. I failed. I was working in a job that I loved, and I lost it. I had to move back home. My
Mm.
relationship that I was in ended, and then a little good thing happened when I got a job in Dublin, and then
Yeah.
a couple of months later, my mum passed away. So it was just like a lot of change in a short
Wow.
amount of
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
I think I think my mind was processing in the background in some way. And then a year later, in around 2011, I was on an app, and I don't know, I saw this international view, and I saw this guy and was like, oh, okay, he's nice. And then we both were chatting to each other, and then he lived in Canada and I was living in Dublin. And before we
Yeah.
knew it, it was like a long distance, like, get to know each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
He came over to visit me, and then I went over to visit him. But when I went over for a month. And at this time, I didn't have any OCD. I was completely myself.
Yeah.
I thought I got over the worst of the year
Mm.
that happened previously.
Yeah.
And then just out of the blue, it was just like, what if I'm a pedophile? What if I'm. And then your mind starts. Well, my mind started spinning, and I started panicking, and I started freaking out.
Yeah.
And it became this. It just was so incessant. Like, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Like, what if it's true? What if I am? What if? And then you just the thoughts and images and every kind of permutation of that theme, of that topic, just was going. Like, it was the worst period of my life. Like, I know my mum died and I was close to her, and that was hard, but I would put my OCD as harder, because it just felt so foreign. It was like, this doesn't interest me. This doesn't uh, do anything for me. So why am I freaking out about this? Why is this? why can't I ignore this? It's so hard to
Yeah.
let go.
Yeah.
And so, of course, at the time, not knowing it was OCD, I was freaking out. I was terrified. I was panicking, like absolute. I was losing weight. I wasn't eating. I was I was on the edge of suicide. I was in a really horrible place. But
Wow. Yeah.
slowly, I started to open up. I just told the guy that I was with, like, I wasn't quite myself. I wasn't thinking clearly, which was true, and just that I wasn't feeling very well. And I then had Skype calls with my sister and my friend, and was telling them a little bit the same. Like, look, I'm just not feeling so great, and I'm kind of worried about a lot of stuff in the future. And I was kind of trying to tell them, but I wasn't telling them the whole truth either, because
That's hard. Yeah.
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 But it started to get a little better. Even my sister, like, she sort of joked with me, and she's like, "No, Liam, I'm just going to ask you a question." And she's like, "You don't have to, don't be worrying, but like, have you done any drugs?" And like, I wanted to say yes, because a part of me was trying to figure out why.
That's like an easy way out. Be an easy way to explain it to them.
Yeah. Had I taken something or done something, it would have made so much more sense. But this just appeared out of the blue. I was watching TV, and it just was like an explosion in my head. It was like an atomic bomb. It just blew up, and from there it just went on and on and on. But I came home, and the same thing. I was really bad. I hadn't slept in literally 4 days. I was really at a bad, like, I was physically shaken. I was really upset. I was crying. I was really, really bad. And when I came home, my dad just took me to a doctor. He was like, "We're going straight to the GP. Like, you need seen right now." And in fairness, from then on, it got a little easier. I started opening up a little bit with time.
Yeah.
And then started to learn, oh, this is something I can work with. Like, it's got a name, it's got a diagnosis. It's
absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So that's good. So you managed to open up to the doctor and then slowly to other people as well, I presume.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I remember choosing my words very carefully, because at the time I was so afraid that, if I tell people this, are they going to believe me? Are they going to think I'm, is there something suspicious? Are they going to, obviously the topic is really, ugh. So nobody is really interested in it. Nobody wants to really hear that. And I obviously thought, oh God, people are going to think that I'm deviant, or that there's some underlying, and you get scared, and you only tell people little bits. Like, I just at the start was telling people I was worried about my future, which technically was true. But I just used my words very carefully, because I thought, I don't want people to think the wrong thing here,
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of people just don't understand about a lot of mental health problems, especially OCD.
Yeah.
And yeah. Okay, so then you I take it that you found a specialist in OCD that you worked with?
Not really, actually. No, I think, well, okay, so a year later, I left Dublin. I think I left Dublin around 2012, and I moved back home for a little bit. And prior to moving to Dublin, I was seeing a bereavement counsellor from the care charity that my mum was getting help from. They also provided counselling for family and stuff. And I was just seeing bereavement counselling just to kind of talk about my feelings.
Yeah.
And my dad thought it would be good if I go and speak to him again. So I kind of slowly started to open up to him. But it was just counselling. It wasn't quite therapy. It was just a soundboard, 1 hour for me just to kind of talk about whatever.
But maybe initially that's what you needed.
No? Yeah, definitely. Not to undermine counselling and talk therapy, but I think I needed, looking back on it, more vigorous, more CBT, ERP type therapy. And
absolutely,
I didn't get that for about, I'd say about 3 or 4 years later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So you eventually came to it. So in those kind of 3 years, like, did you kind of like live with your OCD quite well? Did you learn to kind of manage it like yourself, or what did you?
Yeah. So my cousin actually has anxiety as well, and I don't think he has OCD, but he has anxiety quite bad. He panics a lot about what if he is sick in public, you
Yeah.
know. And I think maybe he's got OCD a wee bit because his theme, he has a theme and he has a topic. But long story short, he basically advised I read a book. What was it called? Yeah, the Charles Linden method. And
Right.
I tried it, and I remember reading a line in the book, and it said, "Anxiety is a learned behavior. You can unlearn anxious behavior." And for some reason, I just started thinking, what if I want to unlearn? What if I don't want to unlearn anxiety? What if I want this? What if I'm choosing this? And then of course I went into a
No.
further spiral of maybe this is a choice.
Yeah.
This is, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Yeah. So it became another OCD topic.
oh God, it just wouldn't stop.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was getting very scared about reading about it for a while. I was kind of like, I don't want to know about it. I don't want to hear from anything or topic about OCD.
Mm.
And I remember really about, yeah, 2 or 3 years later, I think living with it. And at the time, I was still seeing talk therapists.
Yeah.
And I don't think that was helpful. I think I saw, in the course of 4 years, I think I saw 9 doctors, 7 therapists, and a lot of nurses, because I couldn't convince myself that this was OCD. I
Yeah.
was
Yeah. Yeah.
still,
Yeah.
what if
Yeah.
they're wrong? What if they're wrong? This, that kind of thinking. But
Yeah.
one day I vividly remember thinking, at the time my theme was about what if I kill my boyfriend, and I thought one day at work I was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't keep thinking about this fucking. Oh, sorry. I was like,
No, it's fine. Don't worry.
yeah, I can't keep thinking about these things, and I just gave up. My mind, I think what I was doing that day was acceptance and commitment therapy, some trick or technique where I just accepted that I had these thoughts,
Yeah.
and that was a big turning point for me. I remember vividly that
Absolutely.
day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I think for me also, when when I turned 30 and I finally realized I had OCD, um, acceptance was absolutely key. Although I don't really like the word acceptance these days because it's such an open word and you hear it all the time, like all
Sure.
over
Sure.
Instagram. It's just
Yeah.
accept your anxiety. And it's like,
Oh.
well, what on earth does that actually mean? And how
Yeah.
do you do that?
Yeah.
But it is key. And like, maybe a better way of kind of saying it is to try to make room for anxiety or to make some space for it, because that's all we're doing is learning that it's okay to have anxiety, that it's not necessarily a bad thing. And kind of, if you can get on with your life despite having anxiety, then you're going to feel a lot better.
Absolutely, I completely agree. Anxiety is an emotion. Every emotion is a valid emotion. You're allowed to feel whatever you feel because you're human and nobody's perfect, and everybody feels. It's like when my mum died, I remember my sister being really like giving me a wide berth when it came to like grieving. She's like, Liam, and my dad, both of them really, they were both like, you do what you need to do. There is no way for your, there is no process, there is no formality with this. There is no rule that you have to follow. And I often think that's true with emotions and OCD and my anxiety. Like, well, if I feel that today, then I feel it today, and that's just how I feel. And I give myself less of a hard time. And
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Unfortunately, I think we've got to a place in our society now where we kind of feel the social pressure to be happy all the time, and that's just not realistic. Sometimes we're going to feel a bit sad, and sometimes we're going to feel anxious, depending on what's going on in our lives. And it's as much as we want to be like super happy all the time, it's very hard. And actually, like, learning to embrace all of those different emotions is so important and helpful. Yeah.
Totally.
So, what do you think has been the hardest thing about having OCD?
The How long you got? Um, Honestly, the theme, like the whole area or topic around the way OCD has a subject matter, like the
Yeah.
way it sort of just latches on to that thing that you find most abhorrent, or it's kind of like, I always remember I went to a support group when I lived in London,
Mm.
and I remember sitting in a room with about 12 other people and listening to their OCD. And in my head, of course, I'm nodding, going, "That, are you stupid? Like, how does that scare you? How does that worry you?" But that's them. So of course it's scary and terrifying because that's their fear and their obsession. And mine's is over here about this topic, and somebody else might go, "Whatever, I don't know about that." So I think the theme thing is very difficult because it's the part that not everybody understands. Everybody thinks OCD, the hand washing, the counting, the checking, the compulsions are very obvious for people, but nobody talks about the obsessions
Yeah.
because it's so taboo for some people, for a majority, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. And some of the themes can seem, some of them are disgusting, some of them are just, like just strange, and others are just like, you just think that they're just weird. Like, for example, I was writing a blog the other day and I was trying to describe some sensory motor obsessions that I used to have, like
Yeah,
like regarding my mouth and like different things to do with that.
yeah,
And when I was writing it down, I was just thinking, this is so odd. Like, people who don't understand OCD are going to read this and just think like, why are you worrying about that? That's like, there's nothing to worry about with that at all.
yeah,
But unfortunately, when you have OCD, like these bizarre things that before wouldn't have bothered us at all, and clearly don't bother other people at all, become like the center of our world. It's like the only thing that you can think about is this horrible thing that you don't want to think about.
yeah.
And it's torture. It's like, people don't realize, like, yeah, it seems like it's nothing, but actually it's like, to the OCD sufferer, it's a torment. It's a
Yeah.
real torment.
It is torture. At its worst, when mine really exploded at its time at the start, I was I was like, I wouldn't wish this on my enemies. I wouldn't wish this on Hitler. I wouldn't wish this on, like, I was so terrified that this is, a thing that, like, I was like, I wouldn't wish this on anybody. This is torment. This is living torture.
Mm.
It's
Yeah.
That's the hardest part, I think. I think anybody can learn to get better. Anyone can, and everybody learns differently. Therefore, they learn quickly or slowly or complicated or simply.
Mm.
But I think the themes are like, because that's the part that's the whole point, I think, is that it finds that thing that you find most personal, or,
Yeah.
you know,
Absolutely. Yeah. It tends to kind of pick up on the things that you care about most.
exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so after these kind of 3 years of you trying to kind of deal with it yourself, and, searching, speaking to different doctors and doing these like different things, you eventually found a proper CBT therapist, was it?
Yeah. I think I saw a CBT therapist. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was in around my 34th year, I think, of it starting, roughly. And at that stage, I wasn't as consumed by it as I was at the start. It wasn't, I think, because a year previous or a couple of years previously, I did that. I did a thing one day where I just sort of gave up, like, my mind. I had another theme. I was worried I was going to kill my boyfriend.
Yeah.
And that day, I just kind of remember reaching like a, do you know what? Hands up, I don't care anymore. Like,
I think it's you. Sometimes you get to a point where you're just exhausted. You're
yeah,
so exhausted of the
yeah,
process, and sometimes when it changes, it kind of indicates or shows you that what you were worrying about is actually nothing, because when the new theme comes along, you
uh-huh.
can completely forget the old theme,
Yeah,
and it's like it's not important anymore at all, and the new theme becomes like the biggest thing in the world.
oh yeah,
And it's interesting because it kind of shows that actually like that thing that you were worrying about isn't actually kind of, you know, that worrying or something that's that important at all.
Exactly.
But yeah.
I totally, the themes, it's your reaction to the theme, like the way you behave to the topic is what's causing you anxiousness, is, you know, the OC cycle. And what else was it? What else were we saying? We were talking about.
So the therapist that you went to see, the CBT therapist.
Yeah, I remember him very vividly, and because at the time, you know, I was so consumed with the themes and the topics, I didn't know that it was my reaction, etc. What we just talked about. I had remember telling him about my fears and the obsessions and the thinking part, and I just remember him going, "Liam, I honestly don't care what you're thinking. Like, your behavior is what's causing you." You know, that he just repeated what I just said. He came at it from a very wise place. And that was a big turning point for me, because I suddenly learned, he's right. I had all these different fears and obsessions, but I keep reacting the same way. I keep panicking about every single thought in my head. It's me that's the problem. You know, like, in a way, like.
Yeah. So he kind of gave you a bit of like kind of psych education in a way of like, this is what's going on in your head and you're repeatedly doing this, and it allowed you to kind of see the processes for what they are. It
was a real humbling experience in a way, because it was like a slap in the face. It was like, it's not your OCD, it's you that's the problem, you know, like that kind of thing. Like,
It
was a really good shake.
A useful slap in the face.
Yeah.
Okay, and then he devised a plan for you with ERP and that kind of thing.
Yeah, you know, we done one ERP, and at the time I didn't even know this was ERP, because again, this whole journey, I hate that word, is like a learning experience. You know, like I didn't know at the time what he was teaching me was ERP, but he basically got me to write down the word pedophile in the book, just write it word after word after word, just page after page after page, just keep filling that book. And I know what he was doing. He was getting me to confront something that I didn't like looking at. And he's like, I want you to be bored of this exercise. That's how much you need to get to, like, that the word doesn't cause any reaction on you. You don't panic. You're fed up writing down this word in a book. Do you know?
Yeah.
That really helped. And from that moment on, I remember him more helpfully than some of the other therapists and therapy that I did, because it was just talking therapy. There was no plan or homework or exercises, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay, so you did things during the session that were helpful, he was kind of
during and outside of the sessions. Yeah, mostly it was outside of the sessions, and he was more of an educator, if I put it that way, than a therapist, because I really learned about OCD from him. I think it's really important that if anyone going through OCD is having a hard time, they really, really, really need to find a therapist who practices, you know, OCD recovery techniques, because, you know, it's life or death. Literally.
Absolutely.
Life or death for some people, because it's hard. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's really, really important and good advice. I couldn't agree more. I think when I was struggling as well, I had, I saw several therapists and doctors, and like most of them just didn't seem to understand. They just wanted to give me pills and wanted me out of their office as soon as possible. One of them eventually kind of agreed to give me some therapy on the NHS. So I went along to this therapist's office and kind of like waited a long time to get in, and finally kind of got in there. And there was this like harassed looking young therapist who was, you know, like amiable and nice and kind, but she didn't have a clue about OCD. Wow. And, you know, wasn't able to help me at all. And it wasn't until I kind of researched and found somebody who was kind of experienced with these kind of things, that I actually began to get some of the support that I needed. That, and doing my own kind of research as well. But yeah, it's so important. It really is to find the right kind of help.
Yeah. Because, if you had cancer, you're not going to go see, like a dermatologist, like go to see the person. Yeah, you go to see the respective professional. And I think the same thing applies with therapy and mental health. If you have an illness, you go and see the correct doctor for that illness,
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I really agree. That's a really, really important message.
Yeah.
Okay. Who are two people that have been like the most influential for you in your like recovery from OCD? I think you've kind of answered. Maybe one was your therapist that you kind of what you worked with.
Yeah. God, I don't know if I could pick two, because I feel like I've picked up little pebbles from everybody,
Yeah. You get little chunks of wisdom from different people that you see, for sure.
Maybe not quite related to the question, but I always remember from the group therapy that I tried. I remember a girl there who was so upset because she was worried about if she was in the wrong gender, that if she might be a man in a woman's body.
Yeah.
And I could tell, and I think other people could tell that night when we were talking with her, she was so upset. She was crying. She was really, I would use the word inconsolable, but she was very upset. And I just thought, wow, that must be really hard, because she's experiencing what I've experienced, but my theme isn't that, because I know I'm a man. I'm not, gender and gender fear doesn't upset me. So it must be so hard. And that was like a little learning moment for me too, because that taught me about the themes and the topics.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think I picked up a lot of stuff from a lot of people. The therapist that day, at the time, he helped me. My dad helped me as well. Me and my dad, we've had a bit of a distant relationship growing up, and we've gotten closer as the years went on.
Yeah.
And even recently, when my OCD went bananas last year, I needed him again, and he was there. And
yeah, that's great.
Yeah, you can definitely, if you can count on friends and family, like you're golden.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's so important to be able to open up to people, and particularly your friends and family. It's I would say though to people that although it's very important, it's like it's also important that you kind of open up to the right ones, the people that you definitely really trust and that you think will understand these things with OCD, because unfortunately not everyone does understand. And it's like the worst thing is if you do open up to somebody and then they don't understand and they're judgmental, or they're that's obviously not going to help. So
Yeah. I think I've had one negative reaction in the entire 10 years.
Wow.
And it came from a doctor.
From a doctor? Wow, there we go.
So I don't know what that says. I don't want people to be afraid. Just as I asterisk that sentence, if you're listening to this and you're worried about telling a doctor, don't be. I think you have absolutely no fear in telling a doctor. But I just remember telling one doctor, because at the time I couldn't convince myself that this was OCD. I was very fearful that this was something else, that it meant something else.
Yeah.
And therefore I needed more reassurance. I was reassurance seeking. My behavior at the time was I need to keep asking, I need to keep checking. But at the time I didn't know that. So when I went to see the 6th doctor at the time, I remember his reaction being very doubtful and questioning me and going, well, have you ever wanted to act on these thoughts? Are you sure? And it just his manner and his tone, and I respect the questions because that he's a professional and he needed to do his work, his due diligence. But I just remember his character coming across to me as like, you don't trust me. I don't like you now. I'm afraid, more than when I walked in here.
Yeah.
because
yeah.
know I'm right. I know there's nothing to worry about.
Yeah, and
Like,
exactly, and he's basically just not. It's an example of a doctor who's just not clued up with
yeah,
OCD, which is
yeah,
unfortunately is, there's still so many doctors out there who are not. Like I was speaking to a client the other day who explained to me a similar situation, and it still happens all the time.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
it's a real shame. It's frustrating.
yeah.
Okay. When you're in the midst of an OCD, I don't know, when it's kind of getting really bad and the OCD is kind of taking center stage, like, are you able to notice how the anxiety kind of naturally kind of goes up and down in that situation?
Only with time.
Yeah.
At the start, no, because first of all, I didn't know it was OCD, and then when I learned it was OCD, but wasn't convinced that it was real, I think it's like like a spectrum, from like not having it at its very, far end, and then being in an absolute OCD anxiety spiral. I think there's a spectrum there, and as you swing from one side to the other, you learn how your anxiety can go up and down at different points, and you can either be anxious about the theme, or you can just find yourself ruminating or checking or doing your compulsions to bring your anxiety levels down. Or for me, like, it's still a learning process. My OCD, I call them spikes. Like, it spiked last year.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I was not even sure at the time that it was OCD, because I was worrying about my actual behaviors, things that have happened in my life that are real, like not these what if scenario thinking things. And
that's an interesting point, actually, because often when when real life problems come in, when you're really stuck in an OCD stage, it's funny how the real life problem can kind of push the OCD out, for like 24 hours or for whatever, and then suddenly, as soon as that problem's solved, straight away the OCD can come straight back in and just
can swoop in, like it's
yeah.
like a wrecking ball. Like, you think like you're this building and there's a wrecking ball, and it's like, wow, I'm gonna come through, and then like they're just they can kind of take over. And it's last year when I was worrying about like my actual life and actual things that have happened. I call them like real events. I didn't know it was OCD. I thought I was just like, oh, I'm such an idiot. I can't believe I said that. Or, oh, I can't believe I did that. But I find, looking back on it, I was thinking about it way too much, and I was being way too self-punishing about it, because that's what happened when I had the thoughts. So it's one thing to have weird thoughts about, oh, what if you're going to, stab someone, or what if you're going to do something bad? It's another to have, thoughts of like, oh, I shouldn't have said that in an argument, or, I wished I had behaved differently at a party, because, you're human.
They can all become obsessions, even these kind of subtle things that aren't quite so obvious. Like they're not so dramatic, but they can still become obsessions where you kind of go over things that you did in the past. Maybe if you have relationship OCD, you can go over again and again and again, like relationships and how you acted in certain situations. And OCD can jump onto all of these types of things.
Totally.
It's
And I think if you have like a relationship theme OCD, or a health, or something that's sort of within the realm of being normally conscious of, like you would be a little bit conscious about your relationship. You'd probably think, oh, do I like them? Do I not? It's normal to think those things. That you're human. But I feel so sorry for people who have the relationship OCD, because for them, when they try and tell other people think like, oh, why are you worrying so much? Like, oh, I dumped them. People are really quick to throw in their advice. And
Absolutely. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
probably need at that moment is just somebody to listen.
I mean, because everyone thinks they're like an expert with relationships now,
Aye.
because it's
Yeah.
something that we all deal with.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. So when it comes to like the real life OCD topics and themes, I think they're tough because
yeah,
it's hard to separate like the fictional aspect of some themes like harm OCD. It's hard to separate that from relationship OCD because one is sort of fictional and the other is factual. It's like,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely. Okay. And do you have? I mean, these days with the OCD, like, how are you feeling now? Have you got to a place where you're kind of, like more or less comfortable with it, and sometimes it kind of comes up every now and then, or like, how do you feel these days with the OCD?
Like I feel like I've done better with the themes and topics more
Yeah.
than actual OCD as a totality, like as a
Mm.
as a single unit, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because I spend so much time with the obsessions, and I have some like, put it this way, I didn't learn until 2 years ago that I had compulsions. I thought I just had obsessions. Um, I found a video on YouTube of a therapist explaining that
There's always compulsions.
compulsions are inward just as much as they're outward. Like, you don't have
Yeah.
to hand washing to have compulsions.
Yeah.
You can be
Yeah.
ruminating. You
Yeah.
can be checking the past. You can be
Yeah.
looking for evidence. Those kinds of things.
Reassurance seeking. It's like a lot of it is reassurance seeking behavior. When
I,
when you kind of deep delve down into it, yeah, it's
I wish I
sneaky.
learned that years ago, because I got really sad when I learned that, because I thought I could have saved so many years of worry if I had just known that all this time I had compulsions. It was really sad. And even that therapist, like in my fourth year of having it, he was so helpful, but even he didn't help point
Identify those. Yeah.
that
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
compulsions were also a thing.
Yeah.
He
I think
spent,
that's a problem with calling it pure O,
yeah,
because there's no such thing really as pure O. There's always compulsions. Otherwise, it's not OCD.
exactly.
And when you call it purely obsessional, it's misleading.
Yeah, yeah. Like
Yeah.
recently, like last year, the themes became all about me and my own behavior and real life events. So at the time I didn't know, but my compulsions were confessing. I had to, if I didn't confess something or tell my partner something, I would feel like so much anxiety if I didn't get this off my chest. And then I had to learn that by confessing and reassurance seeking, I'm making this worse. Yes, if this is a real thing and you should talk about the reality of certain things you've said or certain things you've done, but you shouldn't be spending so much time on it the way you are. You should talk about it, get over it, move on, rather
Yeah.
than this constant spiral and cycle.
Absolutely. Yeah. 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 So moving on from that, do you have any like tips or like techniques that you would like highly recommend to other people that could be helpful for them?
I think it's such a personal experience. I think you really have to, first of all, primarily, your North Star should be what you define. Like, I think whatever you're experiencing and however you should cope with it, like, put it this way, I don't know what it's like to have a hand washing compulsion. So I can't advise on what's a good behavior when that happens, or what's a good technique, because that's so individual to that person that, I can only speak from my own experience and say, just learning to like ignore your own head for a little bit. And as hard as that is, because, you have your thoughts, everybody has their stream of conscious sort of stuff throughout the day. It's really hard to tune out from that, like I think it's like watching TV when you were a kid. You used to sit really close to the screen, and then as you got older, you kind of set back more and more. I think there's like a kind of a similar technique involved. You need to
yeah.
Step away a bit from these. The content isn't really that important. It's what you're doing that's important.
So say like you're using using the idea of the television. If rather than kind of staring very, very closely at the TV screen, you're going to sit back in the armchair. You're going to kind of like, notice everything in the room, notice the traffic outside, like paying attention to everything that's going on in that moment, and not just focusing in on the pixels of the screen.
Yep.
Yeah.
That sounds like a mindfulness technique, where if you sit yourself back in the armchair, relax, sit back, look at the room, listen to what's in the room, look outside, like to
absolutely
kind of talk about that metaphor. It's like it's mindfulness right there. Like
absolutely, yeah. I think it's you could call that like an anchoring like metaphor that you might use in mindfulness or ACT. And I think those kind of things for me are really, really helpful. And because it allows you to kind of create a little bit of space. I think whenever I get an OCD thought that comes up, it's like one of the most important things I have to do is just create a little bit of space from that thought, so that I like to think of it like kind of like if you're fishing, and the fish will come along and it will see the hook, and it will, often it will kind of like bite down onto the hook. And if you're really stuck with OCD, then you will really, really bite down onto that hook, and you will get yourself stuck on it. And then you will start to struggle, and you'll get yourself more and more and more stuck. However, if you kind of are being more aware and you're being a bit more mindful, then you can kind of see that hook, but there's that little bit of space between you and the hook, and you're able to see it, but because you have that space between you and the thought, you might bite onto it, but not hard enough that you're going to get stuck on it, and you're able to kind of swim away from that hook and still be okay. And I think that's another useful metaphor to kind of look at it like that, we're all swimming around in the sea, and we need to try our best to whenever those kind of whenever the bait comes along and it tries to tempt us, which is what OCD is. Like the obsessions are like bait. They're trying to tempt us to kind of focus on those things, and then to start performing compulsions. And when you perform compulsions, that's like kind of biting hold of the hook, and you really get stuck. So with that metaphor, the idea is just to kind of notice all those hooks, because we can't get rid of the hooks. We're going to have the thoughts no matter what we do. The obsessions are always going to be there, but we don't have to bite them. We can just kind of allow them to be there and swim around in the sea anyway. And when we do that, it's okay. We learn that the obsessions aren't the enemy. The obsessions are, they're just thoughts. They're just things that are going to be there. And if we stop kind of biting them, then they leave us alone, and we're okay.
Yeah. Definitely fish hooking. Yeah.
Cool. Well, we're just about there. If you could be in my shoes, and there is a question that I haven't already asked, what question would you like ask yourself?
Ask myself? Oh, this is where I could get really existential. Like I put it this way: I'm planning a holiday to Japan this year, because I'm like, I've always wanted to go. I've
nice.
saved up for it. I'm gonna have an adventure holiday. But at the time, like I was researching stuff and I was looking up videos, and I was like, oh, now I want to live in Japan. This guy looks really he looks like he loves his life. I start thinking, do I love my life here in Amsterdam? I would ask myself, like, stop. No, that's not even a question. It's like an instruction. It's like, why are you spending so much time on this? Like, what's your, do you know what, recently a better answer is, what's your metric?
Right.
Because I really believe OCD like is so personal. Like I've said that a few times. Like it's so individual that your standard and your compulsions and your obsessions are yours and yours alone. Yes, you might have hand washing, you know, a few other people might have that, but maybe yours is different because you do it in a certain way compared to somebody else. And it sounds really trivial, but I think those little things are like important for the sufferer, because you just want somebody to kind of notice you and acknowledge you, what you're going through, and sort of say, yeah, that sucks. Like, I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to sit here and say, get over it, because that doesn't help anyone. So like, what's your metric? Like, what are you comparing yourself to? What are you holding? What standard are you holding yourself to if your obsessions, sometimes like mine, are about me and my own behavior or ego or that sounds really complicated, but I don't know, does that make sense?
No, absolutely. Yeah. No, I think you're right. OCD is such a personal thing, and you know, it tends to, as we were saying earlier, it tends to focus in on like our personality traits and our own kind of like weaknesses. Maybe like, you know, it kind of focuses in on these things, or the things that we really care about, things that are very important to us in our personal lives. And it's absolutely.
That's why I would recommend a book called The Imp of the Mind.
Right.
It was a great learning moment for me, because again, the author is a psychologist himself, so he recommended different techniques and different tricks to kind of help you sort of get through this.
Yeah.
And he said, so I remember it always stuck with me. It was, your obsessions are thoughts. What was it? He called it unimportant thoughts at the most inappropriate time. No, inappropriate thoughts at the most inappropriate time. That's all it is. It's just your mind being a little bit hyperactive, you know. And yeah, I remember that book sticking out for me in terms of that.
Absolutely. It's just the way the mind works. Unfortunately, it's like, if you don't want to have a thought, if you tell your mind, like, I do not want to have this thought, you're going to get more of those thoughts.
Yeah.
And the more you say to it, I don't want to have it, the more you're going to have it. As you know, they've done so many kind of experiments to prove that is the case. And it's just the way the mind works. Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have any control of like the content of our obsessions or any of these things. But what we do have control over is what we put our attention on. So, you know, we can choose to kind of put our attention onto, you know, healthy things and positive things, and, you know, to allow the kind of anxiety and the OCD to be there in the background. But we're kind of turning down the volume on the sound when we do that. But yeah, Liam, unfortunately, I think we've run out of time, but it's been absolutely fantastic talking to you. Cool. And thanks a lot for coming on to the podcast.
Yeah.
So there you go, guys. I hope you found that helpful today. I really like the way that Liam was able to articulate his struggles with OCD, and hopefully some of you can relate to that and find it helpful. Remember, if you want to know more about Robert James Coaching, you can find me on Instagram. You can also check me out on my website, www.robertjamescoaching.com, and of course the Facebook group as well. Okay, guys, look out for the next one and see you soon. Cheers. And now just a quick reminder of my disclaimer. Any information that you view on my website, or any information that you listen to on the podcast, is for informational purposes only, and is not intended to be a substitute for actual medical or mental health advice from a doctor, psychologist, or any other medical or mental health professional.